Well, welcome back to Digging into the Bible. This week we're taking a look at Genesis chapter 9. We're on the back end of the flood. Noah is out of the ark, and now we see where do things go from here? All right, starting at verse 1 of chapter 9. And God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Does that sound familiar? God has given this instruction before. He told Adam and Eve to be fruitful and multiply and to fill the earth. Now God has given this command again to Noah and to his sons, to his wife and to their wives, to do again what God asked originally of Adam and Eve. At that time, looking for a different result, perhaps? Well, I mean, God's not unrealistic. He knows that sin is going to continue. But he's promised that he's not going to destroy the world again. But he is still giving that command and that instruction to Noah to repopulate, to do what God had set out to do in the first place, to have humanity populate and govern over the world for him. All right. Verse 2, the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth and upon every bird of the heavens, upon everything that creeps on the ground and all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. And as I give you the green plants, I give you everything. But you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. And for your lifeblood I will require a reckoning. For every beast I will require it, and from every man, from his fellow man, I will require a reckoning for the life of man. There's a little bit of a pattern here, or kind of establishing ground rules where, we're not to run around killing willy-nilly, but the deal is that we are provided with food through the eating of flesh, eating of animals. But there's proper ways to do this. He makes a point to say, you're not going to eat it with its lifeblood in it. So there's kind of a hint. God gets into greater detail, and we'll cover that as we go into how that is to be done and how the food is to be prepared. But the same way God had given the plants to man to eat and to live on, he is now making sure they understand that he is giving the animals as well. So maybe there's a shift here in the relationship between man and animal, even further than it already had been, as God gives to humanity the right to eat animals. My lunch today was a fried chicken sandwich. It was great. It was nice and tasty. Had it leftovers from last night. Tastes great. Really enjoyable. I know there are people that for whom that is troublesome. And for those of you who approach life and have a concern with regard to whether you should or should not eat animals, if that's a point of struggle for you or your family, feel free to not eat. There's no requirement here, but scripturally, we see that God is giving that to humanity, that we are able to do so. So if it is not a point of conscience and a concern for you, it shouldn't be. It doesn't need to be. There's no requirement that it is, not from a scriptural standpoint. But we don't have to shame each other. If you would rather abstain, fine. And those of us who eat meat should not inflict that upon others. But vice versa, those that have a moral objection and feel that they shouldn't, there isn't, at least from a scriptural standpoint, a reason to require anything other of our fellow Christians. Instead, we have freedom to make our own decisions in what we will eat in that regard. Up to that point where God does point out there are certain foods and certain ways to provide or prepare the food that are kind of out of bounds. And that gets a little more detail when God forms his special people, his chosen people. When we get to that point, there's a little bit of a difference in which food and which animals are allowable and which aren't. He doesn't get into that yet, but that is forthcoming. But notice also here that there's a bit of an explanation with regard to the protection of humanity's life. And he's taking this small group. You have 4 men, 4 women, got the 3 sons of Noah, Noah himself, his wife, their three wives, takes the eight of them, and he's establishing the ground rules that they ought to respect life. That there's a difference between life of, the chicken that I ate as part of my sandwich today and the life of our children or our neighbors, that their life ought to be taken a little more seriously and protected more vigorously. Some of the time, I've seen this put out there where there's a question. I think Dennis Prager does this as kind of a thought experiment to find out where people are at morally. To say if you see a person that you don't know drowning along with your dog, which would you save? And I think there's an emotional tug, and he is playing with that. The emotional tug is to say, I want to go and rescue my dog because that my dog is personal. But if I can only save one, which has greater value? Well, if we pause and reflect about it and look at verses like here we have in Genesis chapter 9, there is a greater value to the human life that is there. That doesn't mean there's no value to the dog. We ought to protect animals. We ought to treat them properly. We ought not, even for animals that are primarily raised as food, they ought to be cared for well, that their lives are not taken for granted and they're treated humanely. But there is a difference scripturally and theologically between the life of your pet that you love, and a neighbor that you don't even know. That neighbor, that person that you might see drowning, they're the ones that we really ought to be saving their life. Even if we don't know anything about them, and even if we never get to know them, it's heartbreaking to give up a pet and to lose a pet. Yeah. But even for a person that you don't know, there is greater intrinsic value in their life than in the life of a pet. I mean, this is difficult stuff. And I'm sure if you have this conversation with your kids, this is going to be a hard stuff. This is difficult, because we have personal vested interest in one of the individuals. I love my dog. How can you tell me this? But there is within humanity the image of God in a way that there isn't with animals. And based on that, God is establishing this ground rule and insisting upon that we look at fellow humanity with a greater care and to love them and to look out for them in a way that we don't the rest of creation. All right, we've done a big chunk here over this small number of verses, only 5 verses, and we've done a good number here. But I'm going to pause here so we don't run too long, and we will pick up at Genesis chapter 9, verse 6 next time. God bless.